Nah, I know I won't. Are we ready?
Three,
Yeah,
two,
that way. V Live like Houston. Oh, bro, it's the session.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Session Podcast. It's your boy Zoe. We in the building, man. Fiber Studios. We got another session for y'all, man. Today, I got a little special guest for you guys, man. I got one of the homies here. Her name's Ashley. How you doing, Ashley?
Hi, how are you?
Ashley's gonna help me out with today's episode because recently I was talking to my mom and I was trying to learn a little bit more about like my lineage, my family's lineage, and I learned that actually very close to me in lineage, one of my great grandmothers is actually an indigenous person from America and full blown at that, somewhere in West Virginia, and I believe she came from some Cherokee tribe. Unfortunately, she passed, giving birth to 3 kids, triplets. And so it just sparked my interest into, here on the Session Podcast, I like to just explore the possibilities. And a couple things that crossed my mind. I don't think we talk much about, in terms of creation stories, what the indigenous natives, however you want to explain it, what they talked about. And, we hear things from the Bible, we hear things from the Quran, we hear things from so many of these other cultures, but I don't think us as a whole, as a society, we take into account what the natives may have seen and may know about how we were created as a people, how we got here as humanity, some of these cataclysms that we know about now, like Younger Dryas, and many other things, including aliens, UFOs, landforms, earthquakes, the sun, the moon. And so I went ahead and asked Ashley, who is a very great homie of mine, and she has some indigenous background, correct, Ashley?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about what your actual background is with the indigenous culture.
So my dad is half black and half Navajo. Technically, we don't like to call ourselves Navajo because that's what the Spanish called us. We're really called the Neta, which means the people. That is actually like how we introduce ourselves. That's what we kind of list ourselves as, even though we're still listed as Navajo in, I guess you would say, American society and in culture, but we are actually called the Dene.
Nice, very nice. So, from my understanding, you've been to reservations. You've been there with the family.
Yeah, I grew up with my family.
Yeah, so you know a little bit about just some of the ancient teachings and stories passed down to you guys, right?
Yeah. Usually what it is like with kids, especially in the wintertime, or this is how my grandmother told me when she was younger, and even with us when we were kids, all the kids would be in the hogan. And the hogan is what we call our traditional homes. It's an 8-sided octagon home, and our doors always face east to meet the rising sun. Every Navajo home that you'll meet, the door is always going to face east to face the rising sun.
Is there some significance to them facing east, or is it because they want to get the morning sun?
No, I think the presence of facing east is basically to welcome your day.
Right.
Like to just, not even just because, it's the sun. It's like kind of like in its own ritual. And at one point in time, a lot of Navajo people would go out and they would say their morning prayers to the sun with corn pollen. And up until when my great grandmother passed away, she was 106. She would get up in the morning and go do her morning prayers, and then go walk out and go talk to the sheep and go do her thing, and then come back to the house.
Very nice. And so what we know, from just common education, indigenous people really lived off of the land. The land was the big thing for them. What is their account on how we as people were created?
Well, we have a story. So how it goes is that we have been through 4 worlds, okay? And the first world is called the Black World. And in the story, it's called Nahot Di'il, which means the Black World. And from this dark world, that's where we actually came. That's where you had first woman, first man, and coyote. And they are the ones who came to start building this black world that they emerged in. And so that's the first story. Now, the world that we're in now is called the glimmering or white world. And that takes place after this great flood. And so this is the fourth world that we have moved into as far as our emergence place.
So they also have a story about the Great Flood, which
Yes.
we know scientifically is called Younger Dryas, which took place around 11,600 years ago now. So after this Great Flood, what was there? That was the creation of the new world.
Of this world.
Of this
So
world.
we were already a part of a world. So the first world was the black world. And I ended up taking a quote about the dark world. And so basically it was three beings. It was first woman, first man, and coyote. So all of a sudden this other male figure appears and his name was first Angry, or also Coyote. And he said to the three of them, you believe that you were the first persons here, but you're mistaken. I was living here when you were formed. And then all of a sudden, four other beings came. These, we don't know if they're people or they were humanoid, but they were yellow in color and they were called the wasp people. And they knew the secret of shooting evil and could harm others. And then they were very powerful. That made 8 people so far now in this black world. And then 4 more beings came, and they were small in size. They wore red shirts and had little black eyes, and they were known as the spider ants. And they knew how to sting, and they were great people. And after that came a whole crowd of beings. Now, this is the part that gets kind of interesting that stood out to me. After these came a whole crowd of beings, dark colored they were, with thick lips and dark protruding eyes. They were the black ants. They also knew the secret of shooting evil and were powerful, but they killed each other steadily.
So could they been talking about Africans, saying like ant people?
So when I kind of try to put it in the best perspective when I was reading it, I thought that the wasp people and also the spider ant people were of Asian descent. And then I think the actual like ant people, the black ant people, were black people. And I think when they basically found themselves in this black world, I want to say that they were probably at this big meeting place, or they end up stumbling upon this place that was already inhabited, and they saw these people. So when I heard like the wasp people and the spider ant people, it gave me reference to like Asian, or maybe even like people from the like Caucasus Mountains that aren't necessarily just Asian, but kind of like in between in looks. And then also then the ant people, that immediately stood out to me being black people. They were mighty in numbers because they said a lot of them came. And then also they were steadily fighting with each other and killing off each other. So this could have been like intertribal war. It could have been fighting off of land, them from different places, as we know, as Africa being a vast continent of many like cultures and languages. But for this to be like the first world that we came into that did not know about, to even mention black people, that's the beginning, you know?
Yeah. So in their times during this new world, they ended up probably getting a bunch of explorers who were probably traveling and stumbled across this land. They met a bunch of different people. They probably shared.
I think this was before even the flood.
Even before the flood?
I think this was before the flood, because the flood is what transitions us into now this world.
This world.
So this is the 4th world. This is the first world.
The very first world.
The very first world. And that's why they called it the black world. And I think this is from a space that they might have like stumbled into, you know, them being the only man and woman of whatever descent that they came from. And then they run into this being who was known as like also like Bad Coyote.
Yeah, who said he was already here.
He said, I was already here, and I saw when you guys got here. I saw when you were formed, and then all these other beings come. So I think this probably takes place way before the Great Flood.
So according to their story, in a sense, Earth was kind of like a meeting place.
Yeah.
For a lot of different
other beings, and then other beings started kind of showing up after this as well. They kind of go into reference as these the first beings that they kind of met, and then it's more beings that come later on as they transition into the 2 other worlds before they get to this last one.
Because there's a lot of talk about a specific alien race called Pleiadians, which they're supposed to look like modern man, but they are blonde-haired, light blue-eyed people. And apparently they came here. These are some, old ancient UFO stories. And a lot of people are talking about it now. And they say like they came here, and a lot of people interbred and things like that. And that's just interesting to hear that they have those stories where we know like the story about the Anunnaki from the Book of Enoch, and how the descendants may have came here and came down and interbred and things like that. And so it's just interesting to hear, because I don't think we take much into account with the natives where we live. We literally live on this land.
Yes.
And we don't really like know what their story is as far as creation. And so is there any more to that as far as after the fourth world? Is there
Yeah, so it basically goes into the two other worlds before that. So you had the yellow world, and then you also had this one is the white and glimmering world, and then you had the turquoise world. So it kind of transitions as it talks about all these people start fighting amongst themselves, and you know what happens after that, and then a lot of like, it's kind of dark. It's a lot of death.
Because I know a lot of stories sometimes can be told in depiction, and where you have to kind of figure out exactly what it meant because it was so long ago.
Yeah.
But does it kind of go into what caused the Great Flood or why the Great Flood happened, or do they just know there was a Great Flood?
No, they go into so they talk about the fighting. It's basically like I would have to go to the third world. So like we said, the first world is the black world. It's Nehotil, and then the blue world is Nohototzil. And then Nihatso is the third world, which is the yellow world. And then this fourth world, Nihalkai, which is the fourth glittering world or the white world. And so you would have to kind of go, I know in the blue world, all of a sudden these blue animals end up appearing and blue beings. And then as they transition through that, they go into the yellow world and then the yellow beings and then these yellow animals that end up appearing. So it sounds like they're actually traveling. It sounds like they're traveling through large amounts of land. And for us, we think of world as it being a whole context, but world could actually mean another place as far as land. That's a world to you. That's all they know in their world.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's basically what that is that they're traveling. And I think this is right before they get to, I guess they say as far as the Navajo or any indigenous people crossing like the great like bridge, the land bridge. I think that's where the third world is, as they're like transferring over and they're trying to get to this side of the continent. If you want to go with how they say people got here, it makes sense to be the third world, the yellow world, and then the fourth world becomes this, and then the flood, and then all the animals crossing into this world. Doesn't really describe exactly what the world necessarily looks like because it speaks in context of people being animals. Like we said, the ant people and the wasp people. So it's a lot more digging into that. But I want to say where it takes place is the yellow world has to be right before the Great Flood.
And so I just want to know a little bit more because I feel like this is something we don't necessarily learn a lot about. Just kind of generally, without digging too in depth, how do reservations exactly work?
They vary. So they vary on tribes and they vary on the actual like treaties that were kind of put into place or the guidelines for these tribes and how much land they could have or the areas that they could inhabit. So it varies from tribe to tribe. My tribe is in the Southwest, and technically we're listed as the largest reservation in the U.S. just because of the actual mileage between that whole reservation.
Where's your reservation?
So it's kind of centered between the Four Corners. So we don't spread into Colorado towards the Four Corners because that is the Ute tribe. So it's a whole nother tribe that's right outside of there. But then we have the tip of New Mexico, the southern east tip of New Mexico, the northern east tip of Utah, and then Arizona. And so our reservation starts right outside of Flagstaff, about an hour out. So Grand Canyon is technically on Navajo Reservation. Monument Valley is on the Navajo Reservation. Antelope Canyon is right before you cross into the Navajo Reservation, but that all used to be Navajo land before they started being like, well, Lake Powell is ours. We can vacation there. But that was all land that the Navajo people roamed.
Nice. And so as I do a lot of thinking into and research, said Frankie is a fucking clown. Shout out Frankie, man. But as I do a lot of research into these native cultures, I start listening and hearing about these mythical creatures that they have. And a lot of these creatures are like, even till this day, people have accounts, whether they're videos, whether they're real or CGI or whatever they may be. But something that I know is big is the Skinwalkers. And apparently the Skinwalkers, they're like shapeshifters.
They're shapeshifters. So this is why it hasn't been a lot of like, technically you're really not supposed to talk about them. When you do talk about them to children, they would be stories they would tell them because it was wintertime. So where were you going to go? You had to stay in your hogan. So you would tell kind of like scary stories around the fire in the middle of the Hogan. So, you know, we have a lot of different like things that they tell us not to do, which is like whistling. They tell us not to whistle at night or not to whistle in general or walking around. And I never knew why that was, but you know, my cousins like to joke with me and they'd be like, yeah, because then something's going to answer you. And I'm like, okay, don't say that, bro. Because we're in the middle of nowhere. So when you think about it, it's kind of sad when I say this, but like where my family lived, they didn't get running water and probably until about like 25 years ago. And running water.
Wow.
They're just getting electricity as of last year.
Wow.
They just extended like lines to where they live to actually run electricity. So it was really kerosene lamps and like outhouses when I was a kid. Like I had an uncle and he had a generator. So he would like invite all the kids to kind of come up and we'll watch a movie and he'll turn the generator on. And, you know, that was kind of our little treat. But like after that, it was back to the Hogan. So
that just kind of brings me back to like how a lot of these native cultures, we don't talk much about, and they kind of have a lot of similarities about the things a lot of people are talking about. So like Skinwalkers, and they say that they're shapeshifters, and they may live in the middle of nowhere and at night. But we also hear a bunch of stories about how in the Grand Canyon there are lizard people and reptilians who are shapeshifters, and they live under the earth and they come out at night or whatever it may be. So I just feel that we kind of need to like, if we're going to take into account many stories, I think we have a lot of focus on like Egypt, Kemet, or you know, like Greek mythology and things like that. When we talk about a lot of these creation stories, and these people lived off of the land for thousands of years.
So there is a tribe that actually lives in the Grand Canyon. You can only go visit them maybe like a certain like months out the year, and you have to get a pass, like you have to pay, and it's getting to the point where it's almost lottery style, and they're called the Havasupai, and they're also known as the people of the blue and green water. So they live literally on one of the furthest points down in the Grand Canyon.
And they've been successful.
They've been successful, and it's just because they close off their tribe majority of the year. Like you cannot get into to go see these people. Like they can come in and out of the canyon. A lot of things gets like flown in for them, but they close it off to the public. And so what makes me think more about that is that, so the land that my family lives on was once roamed by the Anasazi, which are called like the cliff dwellers. So, you know, like how you have these ancient like dwellings on the side of the cliffs in the middle of like the Southwest. Well, this is by where my family lives. It's one probably like 15 miles out down a wash that you could go visit off the highway, and it's like a national monument.
Caves?
Like they're built on the side of cliffs with like in cave dwelling kind of situation. So for some, I don't know how they got up there because you can't really see it, but like, yo, they were like, like it's like a straight scale down.
Right.
And I don't know if maybe they had like a back passageway that kind of could get in there.
Yeah.
But I know that there's a wash behind my family's house that, you know, it floods every once in a while, but it's kind of like a canyon wash. And back there, you can find this is what my cousins and uncles have told me when they go to herd the sheep. You can see like actual pottery and like skeletons back there. So if we ever build houses by where my family lives, we have to get it archaeologically surveyed because of what that area had. These people roamed all over. So behind our house on a mesa, there's like shards of pottery. Like, I mean, big shards that you could Google and you could see what a whole piece of that pot looked like. And it's just multiple pieces of it all around there. And so the reason why it's there is that we're told never to touch it.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. Like, you get
scolded
scolded the first time. It's like, yo, you go up there, don't touch it, don't move it, don't do nothing. Like, don't eat. Like, you could look at it, but keep it moving.
That's the thing with trying to learn about even just past worlds where information may have been like lost in just translation or just through different people's ideology on how things may have gone. But when you have actual artifacts and actual things from that nature that you really can study and kind of put the pieces together on how they actually lived, how they actually did things, there's a thin line between taking that shit to go study it and then like leaving it there for preservation and like moral beliefs of like, the dead should have their things and things like that. But like, in a sense, we kind of got to learn, man. We got to know what the fuck is going on.
Yeah, I think also just because of again, like how we talked about skinwalkers and superstition.
Yeah.
We believe that if we touch the things that these people touch, the same thing will happen to us. We believe that they were cursed people, just because of like how they end up having to live like on the side of these cliffs and then end up just disappearing.
Yeah.
Like no one knows what happened to them. No one knows like where they went. Did they end up, kind of changing into another tribe? So that's why a lot of people believe the Pueblos and the Hopis are very much descendants of the Anasazi because of the way they build their homes. So, you hear someone telling you in Navajo, like, yo, you go up there, don't touch anything. And I've seen enough movies with white people in it to know that I'm not going to touch certain things. You know what I mean? I just don't need that shit following me all the way to Chicago.
And that's the thing. That's another thing. So it's clear that indigenous people are really big on like energy and like spirits. Do they have anything on like magic? Do they have any like sort of like magic thing?
Yeah, so that kind of goes into the little like excerpt I got about like skinwalkers. Okay, so when I was a kid and we're going down this dirt road to a squaw dance, right? It's my grandma, her sister, my great grandmother, me and like two of my cousins were in the back seat, right? My great grandmother and my grandmother's oldest sister, the oldest of all of them, she doesn't speak English. She speaks Navajo. My great grandmother only spoke Navajo. So they're speaking to my grandma, telling her to tell us these stories while we're in the car. So she tells us that her uncle, because when you're riding on the reservation and you're going down these dirt roads, you'll see a lot of like livestock. Like people's cows are just kicking it, and you're just like, whoa, it's a random cow right there, or horses. They'll let their horses out to roam and feed, and then they'll come back to the pasture. Same thing with their cows. The only thing you don't see out late at night is sheep. So we end up driving past like a set of cows, and then this is where the skinwalker story comes in, where my grandmother's like, you can tell it's a skinwalker because, animals, their eyes reflect. When you don't see a reflection on their eyes, you need to run.
Oh, that's weird.
She's like, you need to run. Because humans, we don't have that.
Yeah.
So basically, for skinwalkers, my grandmother is telling me that her mother, so my great-grandmother's uncle, her uncle, was in the Hogan. It's late night. He hears the dogs kind of wrestling. So usually, we've always had dogs and animals protecting our sheep by the corral. Right. So he hears the animals like kind of just like, kicking up a stir. And he's like, why are these dogs barking? And it was other dogs as well. So he's like, it's not just mine. Yeah. It's probably from the other people who live further over. So he's like, well, I gotta go to the bathroom. I'm just gonna go take a piss. Let me see what's going on. So he goes outside and he says that he's walking towards the sagebrush, which is the big white sagebrush, and he's walking towards it, and all of a sudden he sees like all this dust kind of kicking up, right? It's running. You hear the dogs barking and running and running. You just see it, and he's like in front of this big sagebrush, and then all of a sudden it stops. So he ducks down. He's like, I don't know what it is, because we do have mountain lions and bears over there, or in coyotes, so you never know what it is. So he said he ducked down, and all of a sudden he watched. So he watched from the sagebrush, and all of a sudden, I guess it might have been like wolf clothing. It might have been a wolf, or it might have been like a mountain lion. All of a sudden, it just kind of like pops up, and it just pulls off, and it's a woman in it. So she's covered in, she's painted like all red, and her eyes are covered in ash, and her body is covered in ash. And he said that she was naked and she was full of turquoise, because this is the thing, they're grave robbers as well. They use them in their dark magic. So medicine men, you have dark medicine men that practice witchcraft. And so there's a show you should watch called Dark Shadows. And it's supposed to take place on the reservation in like the 70s/80s. And it goes into talking about the witch doctors who are Navajo, and they call them hair grabbers. So when you hug people or they're around you, make sure they don't touch you to grab your hair, because they'll use it in their magic. They'll put it in other things, and then they'll put it in a center of like this room, and they'll paint it, and they'll go kill an animal, and they'll let it bleed on the hair. and they're basically cursing you. That's how they poison you with sickness. It's real trippy, but that's basically what these skinwalkers are too. They're witch doctors. So in the expert, it says that animals associated with witchcraft usually include the trickster, which is the coyote. However, it may include other creatures, usually those associated with death and bad omens. They might also possess the living. So this is about skinwalkers, animals or people and walk around in their bodies. Skinwalkers can be male and female. And usually they're told to the children, like I said, they tell us as a complete life and death struggle to the end, with either the skinwalker winning or the Navajo winning. And then they only give us like partial stories where it's kind of like a stalemate, but then a lot of times these are composed as victory stories with the skinwalkers approaching your Hogan and then being scared away. So like you don't get a lot of detail from a lot of Navajo people about skinwalkers, especially like the old heads, because we don't want to talk about it because it's so ingrained in us being scared as children. And just, you know, you have to think about in certain parts of where we're from, especially where I grew up with my family, when the moon isn't out, bro, it's dark and you can't see your hand in front of your face.
Yeah.
It's literally like take the flashlights, go to the outhouse and come back. You know, it's really, really scary. So hearing this story while we're going down this dirt road in the middle of nowhere was scared the shit out of me. And I'm like maybe 6 or 7 and I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And my grandma's like, yeah, you know. And so when he told me that this woman had on all this jewelry and he saw her, he sat there for a minute and watched her and he's like, oh, she must have been a grave robber.
Yeah.
Like that's what he told, you know, my great grandmother, like she must have been robbing graves because she's covered in all this turquoise. And they use turquoise in their black magic from dead bodies. They use bones from dead bodies, hair, all of that in their rituals. And so he got up from this bush and he said he just kind of got up and went, cleared his throat. And Shorty looked at him and fainted. Now, the story goes, you look at them, you catch them in human form as they transition, they die. But he didn't stick around to figure out if she was dead or not. And he said when he went back, nothing was there. So it's no telling if she could have evaporated. It's no telling if something dragged her along or she got back up and left. But he wasn't going to go stick around and see. He came over there, was like, oh, it's gone, walked back home. Like first thing in the morning. So, yeah, it's just, you never really hear many stories about skinwalkers because, like I said, people are scared to talk about them because it is scary out there, man. Like, you want to go out there, it's like the hills have eyes, but none of the weird people.
Yeah. But look, man, we got to start taking more into account what our indigenous people have talked about and have left us to know, and their knowledge on our beginnings and even some of these evil shits that's out here, man. You know what it is. But we're going to get the fuck out of here, man, the Session Podcast. Ashley, I appreciate you for coming through. Frankie, shout out to Frankie, man.
What about, I think adding the Grand Canyon.
What's up?
Because, you know, like, they talk about how the
Smithsonian?
The Smithsonian had covered up the ancient Egyptian findings that were found in the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Also, archaeological finds of there being a giant city in the Grand Canyon underneath.
Yeah?
Heard about that stuff?
I think that's why they don't allow people down there with the Havasupai. I think that's why. I think those people know. I think they've explored enough being ancient people from down there because they're one of the only tribes that still occupies that land. And I think the government probably pays them a nice amount of money to stay there and probably to watch over these things and also to keep their mouths shut. Like, they're a small tribe that lives down there.
And they probably the only ones who truly know how to navigate.
Yep.
And if they were smart, they probably only give out pieces by piece. You know, they probably don't give them the whole thing. It's more so like, oh, you want this? I'll go get it. Wait right here. Type
Right.
Also with like technology and them being able to scan the land from satellites and stuff,
Yeah.
like that, them finding gaps or caves that are size of giant cities.
There's a story about an expeditioner who went down there, and he went for a few days, and he stumbled across this city. Apparently, he went in, and he found mass grave of like 27 warrior of all ancient Egyptian descent and everything like that. And then apparently he went and got the government. Because he's like, hey, I found this amazing artifacts, blase blase, this whole city inside this fucking cave. They were like, I get like alien depictions of them being brought there, inside there. And the story goes that, you know, during one of the cataclysms, something came down and brought these people into the caves. And that's how they survived the cataclysm in the Grand Canyon. And so once he got the government, they had completely shut it down. It's like immediately after he took him there, showed it, shut him down, and then as he tried to speak out about it, they kind of shut him down.
You know, I always wonder, like, what is it with hiding all of these things? Like, what agreement are we in?
Well,
as people, the leaders, right?
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that are signing. Everything's about agreement or a covenant.
Yeah.
So, like, what is these metrics?
I think the thing about hiding it,
Like,
well, because a lot of the foundation of just humanity right now in general is like a lot of people believe in like Christianity or their religious beliefs. So religion, I feel like, is one of the main controls over I don't know percentage, but it's got to be like 90% of the world's culture has to do with what they believe in spiritual.
It's like the Vatican.
And I think if there were
controls so much.
that's the thing. It's like the Vatican, but even in other cultures, like, you know, you can damn near die for believing in some other shit.
Yeah.
And so I feel that if there was a civilization that was way more advanced, maybe knew what the fuck life was, per stories like Adam and Eve and how they talked to God directly and things like that. And then we bring into the story about floods. And if we do have like solid proof of where we came from, maybe we made contact with someone or whatever the fuck it may be, we would lose that religious control over the entire fucking world. And everyone would, and as we know now through mental health studies and things like that, everyone is not capable of sustaining that information.
Here's also the other side of that reality is that obviously it's come to a point to where there's been a group of people in charge for so long.
Yeah, that too.
Right? Like, we're talking
Why
about
would you want to change it?
generation
Yeah.
after generation, right? To where
Who are we to fucking change this? Yeah.
right, that they've had that control. And so whenever these particular things come to light, that has to be, you know, hidden.
Yeah.
Quiet.
I think it's bullshit that we have even just natives on reservations. Like, what the? They was here already. And like, how can we even have a government and then?
It's the land, it's resources. So I know for our tribe, they dug up all over our reservation for uranium to make bombs and then left that shit there. And now we have a ton of birth defects and pancreatic cancer and throat cancer and cancer being from this uranium left over all over their land. And it then seeps in the ground. Our sheep eat, you know, the sage, drinks the water, and then it poisons the people all over again. And that's one thing. Like, resources is like the number one goal for a lot of these places, or a lot of, like, you know, colonization and conquering, is because they want, you know, our resources. And that's what they did. A lot of these indigenous people sat on things, you know, and they took them.
Yeah. It sounds like the natives knew similarly to what the Egyptians knew in terms of these people who came and started mining this earth. But that's a different story for a different day. Ashley, I thank you for coming through. You got us so much knowledge, because I never would have like known any of that, and that was awesome to hear. And if you see a fucking skinwalker, run. Don't talk about it. Don't whistle at night. You never know what's the fuck gonna whistle back. Session Podcast. We have Firebreak Studios. We signing out.